Conor McGregor versus Khabib Nurmagomedov. These two didn't just dislike each other, they were polar opposites on a collision course. Strangely, it didn't start that way. Back in 2015, McGregor actually predicted Khabib would one day be lightweight champion. No bad blood, just two elite fighters chasing greatness. The first cracks appeared when McGregor began his campaign for two-division dominance. After demolishing Jose Aldo in 13 seconds, he was supposed to face Rafael dos Anjos for the lightweight belt. When RDA pulled out injured, Nate Diaz stepped in and shocked the world by submitting McGregor. Meanwhile, Khabib was growing frustrated watching McGregor get title shots while he was stuck on the sidelines. When McGregor leapfrogged Khabib to fight Eddie Alvarez for the belt, the Russian went off on Twitter. McGregor fired back with typical arrogance. The tension exploded backstage at UFC 205, where security had to separate them after a heated confrontation. Khabib later said McGregor was being disrespectful, sizing him up like some kind of threat. McGregor went on to demolish Alvarez, becoming the first simultaneous two-division champion in UFC history, but instead of defending either belt, he chased the Floyd Mayweather boxing match, getting stripped of both titles. While McGregor made bank in boxing, Khabib dominated Michael Johnson and Edson Barboza, cementing himself as the #1 contender. Then came April 2018, the bus incident that changed everything. Khabib confronted McGregor's teammate Artem Lobov in a Brooklyn hotel for disrespectful comments. This set McGregor off. He flew to New York with 30 of his crew, stormed the Barclays Center, and attacked a bus carrying Khabib and several other fighters. McGregor threw a dolly through the window, cutting Michael Chiesa and Ray Borg with glass shards. The footage was insane. McGregor and his team running through the arena like a gang, then fleeing the scene while Khabib posted videos asking for his location. "Send me location. I'm going to come wherever you want." Ireland, New York, Brooklyn, Moscow, doesn't matter. McGregor was arrested, faced multiple charges, but the damage was done. The rivalry had exploded into mainstream consciousness. When they finally fought at UFC 229 in October 2018, it became the biggest pay-per-view in UFC history with 2.4 million buys. The build-up was toxic. McGregor attacked everything: Khabib's character, his religion, his family, his father. He called him a backwards Kent and made jokes about his country and faith. Khabib, normally calm and respectful, promised to humble McGregor inside the cage. When the fight happened, Khabib delivered. He dominated McGregor with relentless wrestling, dropping him in the second round before submitting him with a neck crank in the fourth. But the chaos wasn't over. Immediately after getting the tap, Khabib jumped over the cage and attacked McGregor's teammate Dylan Dennis, while McGregor fought with Khabib's cousins inside the octagon. It was pure mayhem. The UFC had never seen anything like it. Both fighters were suspended, fined, and forever linked. Khabib retired undefeated in 2020, leaving McGregor still throwing shots on social media, but never getting revenge. Jon Jones versus Daniel Cormier. This wasn't just a rivalry. It was pure hatred between two of the greatest fighters ever. It began at UFC 121 in 2010, when a young Jon Jones met Daniel Cormier backstage. Jones, hearing about Cormier's wrestling pedigree, tried to be friendly but slipped in a cocky line: "I bet I could take you down." For an Olympic wrestler, that arrogance lit a fire, and the seed of one of MMA's ugliest feuds was planted. Things got worse when Jones, already light heavyweight champ, refused to work with any sponsor that supported Cormier. He then mocked DC's Weight Online before Cormier had even debuted in the UFC. When Alexander Gustafsson got injured, Cormier was brought in to replace him for a title fight against Jones in 2014. Both fighters were excited. Jones even privately messaged Cormier expressing his eagerness for the matchup. But a week before the fight, everything exploded. At the press conference, they got into a full-blown brawl in front of the media. Pure chaos. Security had to separate them while they continued screaming at each other. Jones mocked Cormier's defense on Twitter, telling him to put ice on his face. Cormier fired back: "You hit like a girl, and I could eat those punches all day." During the promotional tour, their hatred grew so intense they had to be kept in separate rooms. The most chilling moment came during an interview when Jones straight up threatened Cormier's life. "I would literally kill you if you spit in my face." "Yeah, let's try that. I'm not talking about fighting you. I would kill you." When they finally fought at UFC 182 in January 2015, Jones won by unanimous decision, but the bad blood didn't end there. Jones continued mocking Cormier's Olympic wrestling, saying he knew DC would break under pressure. He went further further saying he still didn't respect him and hoped Cormier was in tears. But Jones's demons caught up with him. A hit-and-run incident involving a pregnant woman led to his suspension and the UFC stripping him of the title. Cormier stepped in, beat Anthony Johnson, and claimed the vacant belt. This only made Jones more bitter. He continued calling Cormier's championship reign fake, saying his belt was imaginary because he never beat the real champion. In order to be a champion, you have to beat the champion, Jones repeatedly said. When they finally rematched, Jones brutally head-kicked Cormier unconscious in the third round, completely breaking him. But 2 weeks later, Jones tested positive for anabolic steroids. The result was changed to a no contest, and the title was returned to Cormier. The rivalry was so toxic that even after both men retired, the hatred lingered. During a random ESPN interview, when Jones thought the cameras were off, he told Cormier on a hot mic, "I would kill you." This wasn't just a fight rivalry. It was personal, toxic, and unforgettable. The greatest grudge match in UFC history. Israel Adesanya versus Alex Pereira. This rivalry began in kickboxing and became one of the most compelling sagas in modern UFC. Israel Adesanya, the flashy Nigerian New Zealand striker, and Alex Pereira, the powerful Brazilian with indigenous roots, first clashed in Glory Kickboxing. Their backstories couldn't be more different. Adesanya was all precision and showmanship. Pereira, meanwhile, came from hardship, working 12-hour shifts as a teenager, battling alcoholism at just 13. Fighting became his way out. In their first bout, Pereira edged Adesanya by decision. In the rematch, Adesanya looked set for revenge until Pereira's left hook, cold and sudden, flattened him. That loss haunted Adesanya as he turned his full focus to MMA. Adesanya rose quickly, becoming UFC middleweight champion in 2019, defending his title with surgical striking. Pereira stayed in kickboxing, capturing 2 Glory titles, until Adesanya's dismissive 2020 interview lit a fire under him. He transitioned to MMA, and in just a handful of fights, earned his shot. At UFC 281, Adesanya dominated early, nearly finishing Pereira in round 1. But in the 5th, Pereira stormed forward, unleashing a barrage that forced the stoppage. Adesanya's title was gone. The score now 3-0 Pereira. But this saga demanded a sequel. At UFC 287, Adesanya delivered one of the most iconic knockouts in UFC history, baiting Pereira into an exchange and detonating 2 right hands that froze him on the spot. Redemption complete. Afterward, Adesanya walked away satisfied with the rivalry at 3-1, while Pereira moved up to light heavyweight and captured gold again. Their saga remains one of the greatest redemption arcs the UFC has ever seen. Rampage Jackson versus Wanderlei Silva. If you want pure violence dressed up as a rivalry, this is it. Quinton, Rampage Jackson, and Wanderlei Silva created one of the most brutal feuds in combat sports, spanning from Pride to the UFC. Their first encounter came in Pride 23 in 2002. Silva, known as the Axe Murderer, was in his prime, a ferocious striker who destroyed opponents with knees and punches in the clinch. Rampage, a powerful wrestler with knockout power, was still finding his footing in MMA. Silva absolutely mauled him. He kneed Rampage's body and head repeatedly against the ropes, then finished him with punches. It was a one-sided beatdown that left Rampage unconscious, and Silva celebrating like a maniac. But this was Pride, and rematches were inevitable. When they met again at Pride Final Conflict 2003, Silva picked up where he left off. Once again, he trapped Rampage against the ropes and unleashed his signature knee strikes. The referee stopped it due to a cut above Rampage's eye, giving Silva his second brutal victory. 2 knockouts, 2 devastating performances. Silva owned Rampage completely. For years, this haunted Rampage. Silva had broken him twice in the most violent way possible. The Brazilian became his kryptonite, the one fighter he couldn't figure out, couldn't touch, couldn't beat. When Pride folded and both fighters came to the UFC, everyone knew this rivalry had to be settled one more time. By now, both men had evolved. Silva was still dangerous but past his prime. Rampage had improved his striking and learned to use his wrestling more effectively. At UFC 92 in December 2008, they finally met for the 3rd time. This time, Rampage was ready. He caught Silva with a perfectly timed left hook that dropped him hard. Silva, showing the heart of a warrior, got back up, but Rampage smelled blood. He unloaded with a barrage of punches that left Silva crumpled on the canvas. After 2 devastating losses in Pride, Rampage had finally gotten his revenge. The look on his face said everything. Years of frustration and humiliation had been erased with one perfectly timed punch. This rivalry wasn't about trash talk or theatrics. It was about violence, respect, respect, and redemption. Silva owned the beginning, but Rampage wrote the ending. A brutal, simple story that still stands as one of MMA's most unforgettable trilogies. Anderson Silva versus Chael Sonnen. Anderson Silva was already being called the GOAT. He'd destroyed legends and made it look easy. Then came Chael Sonnen. Not the most dangerous fighter, but the most dangerous talker. He didn't just trash Silva, he insulted his skills, his mentors, even his ability to speak English. By UFC 117, fans wanted blood. Shockingly, Sonnen backed it up. For 23 minutes straight, he ragdolled Silva, pounding him on the mat while the MMA world watched in disbelief. The upset of the century was seconds away. Then Silva, from his back, snapped on a triangle armbar with 150 left. Sonnen tapped. The champ survived, but his invincible aura was cracked. The rivalry exploded. Sonnen failed a drug test, got suspended, then clawed his way back into title contention. And with every mic in his face, he pushed it further, even taking shots at Silva's wife. That's when Silva finally broke. On a heated conference call, the calm, respectful champion promised to break Sonnen's teeth, his arms, his legs, everything. At UFC 148 on July 7th, 2012, the rematch finally happened. Sonnen came out strong again, taking Silva down and controlling the first round. But in the second round, he made a critical mistake. He threw a spinning back fist, missed completely, and fell to the ground. Silva saw his chance. He hit Sonnen with a brutal knee to the body that doubled him over, then finished him with punches. The fight was over, and Silva had proven he was still the king. Chuck Liddell versus Tito Ortiz. This rivalry put the UFC on the map. Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz began as close friends and training partners, but as both climbed the light heavyweight ladder in the early 2000s, friendship turned into tension. Liddell was the knockout artist on the rise. Ortiz was the flashy champion and biggest star in the company. Rumors spread that Liddell was beating Ortiz up in sparring, and when the UFC made him #1 contender, Ortiz refused to fight. He claimed friendship. Dana White, once Ortiz's own manager, claimed fear. Finally, at UFC 47 in 2004, the fight happened. The build-up was ugly, and Liddell promised a knockout. He delivered. A counter left hand crushed Ortiz, and a flurry of punches forced the stoppage. Ortiz protested an eye poke, but no one was buying it. 2 years later, Ortiz rebounded and earned a rematch at UFC 66, the biggest UFC event ever at the time. Ortiz pushed harder, but Liddell's power broke him again, finishing him in the third round. The rivalry had officially made UFC a mainstream attraction. Both men declined after, but their feud still had one last bizarre chapter, a 2018 trilogy fight under Oscar De La Hoya's Golden Boy MMA. Liddell, 48 and long retired, looked like a shadow of himself. Ortiz easily knocked him out in round 1. Fans hated it, but it showed how much their rivalry still meant. Colby Covington versus Jorge Masvidal. This is the ultimate betrayal story. Once brothers at American Top Team, Covington and Masvidal went from living and training together to one of the most personal feuds in UFC history. Masvidal took Covington in when he was broke, gave him a couch to sleep on, food to eat, and helped him launch his career. But their bond cracked over money. Covington allegedly refused to pay longtime coach Paulino Hernandez the cut he promised, a deal Masvidal had always honored. To Jorge, this wasn't business. It was betrayal. By 2019, Masvidal's star exploded with the fastest KO in UFC history. Their paths were set. At UFC 272, the former best friends finally collided. Covington's relentless wrestling smothered Masvidal, earning a clear decision win. But even wobbled in the fourth round, Colby wouldn't fold. And the story didn't end there. Weeks later, Covington taunted Masvidal again, saying he'd literally kill him if they met in Miami. Masvidal snapped. He hunted Covington down outside a restaurant and attacked him, breaking his teeth, a move that got him arrested for felony battery. Masvidal defended it. Some lines, especially family, can't be crossed. Even in retirement, he said he wants to come back for one reason, to fight Colby again. And until that day, this rivalry still burns. Tito Ortiz versus Ken Shamrock. This rivalry defined the UFC's early years and carried the promotion through some of its darkest days. It was old school versus new school, veteran legend versus rising star. By the early 2000s, Ken Shamrock was already a pioneer, one of the men who gave the UFC credibility in its wild early days, but he was past his prime, searching for one more big fight. On the other side was Tito Ortiz, cocky, charismatic, the reigning light heavyweight champion, and the perfect foil for the aging legend. Their first fight at UFC 40 in November 2002 was a massive event for the struggling promotion. The UFC was far from the mainstream success it would become, and big fights like this were crucial for survival. Ortiz dominated Shamrock, using his superior conditioning and evolving skill set to outclass the veteran. He won by TKO in the first round, while Shamrock's pride gave fans a rivalry to believe in. Most importantly, this feud kept the UFC alive when it desperately needed eyes on the product. Tito vs. Ken wasn't just about wins and losses. It proved that personalities and storylines could drive the sport just as much as skill inside the cage. It was the blueprint for how the UFC would sell fights for decades to come.